Hey everyone, welcome back to the Widowed Parent Podcast Live. I'm here today with Joyelle Mulheron. Joyelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is terrific. You're with Evermore, and today, of course, is Grief Awareness Day, National Grief Awareness Day, I think. So this is a perfect time to be talking about your group, which is a nonprofit advocating for all kinds of terrific and very needed bereavement care changes and policies. So on Grief Awareness Day, to be talking to you about this is perfect. I'm anxious to hear all about what you're doing and especially how we can jump in and help what you're doing. So first, can you just tell us what is Evermore?
Thanks so much, Jenny. We are a nonprofit dedicated to making the world a more livable place for bereaved families. Much like the Widowed Parent podcast, really looking to increase family well-being in the aftermath of death. And so doing that in a couple of different ways, advancing science, advocating for policy change to protect families, and encouraging resource support for professionals who serve them.
Okay. And particularly on the policy front, you guys are very involved with a number of important initiatives. I think right now it's bereavement care policies that you're focused on. Can you tell us, well, first of all, why is this important? Why is this a problem that we need to be addressing?
Right. So paid bereavement leave is up in Congress right now. And so after the death of a significant person in your life, right now working age adults are not eligible for job protection or wage protection in the aftermath. And so in our experience, most employers do what they can to support the newly bereaved individual, but that is not necessarily the experience of all. And so we have been advocating for paid bereavement leave for all newly bereaved individuals, really quite intensely in the past year, and have been working with others like Barry Kluger, Kelly Farley, who've been looking to add the death of a child as an eligible event for job protection in the aftermath. And so partnering with groups like that with them and many others to have paid bereavement leave for working age Americans.
So, okay, so I think what I hear you saying is right now there are some companies who have some policies, but it is not required. It's not across the board. There are big issues, it sounds like, with both, potentially getting fired or potentially being able to take leave, but it's unpaid, which creates struggles and problems. But let me ask, is FMLA something that you could take advantage of here in the case of death, or is that not relevant?
Well, so in the case of death, FMLA is actually not a covered benefit.
Really?
With a handful of exceptions. So in miscarriage or stillbirth, technically you should not lose your job, although we do hear from individuals who have lost their jobs in the aftermath, and that FMLA protection should be extended to both the birthing person and their partner. The other exception is when a soldier is killed in action, that the family should be protected. We have also heard from families, military families, that they have lost their jobs after their sons or daughters were killed in action. The benefit that we are pushing now is 5 days of paid bereavement leave for around certain definitions for newly bereaved individuals. So it could be siblings, it could be parents, it could
spouses,
be spouses, etc.
Right. So, okay, but wait, so I think I heard you saying there are a couple of limited exceptions where FMLA applies, but right now, generally speaking, if you lose your spouse, for example, FMLA, unless it was the military situation you just mentioned, generally speaking, that's not a benefit or a protection.
No. You can be fired the next day. Legally, you can be fired the next day for not showing up to work.
So this is important.
We believe it is.
Yeah. Well, and let me ask, okay, so you're talking about policy, you're talking about legislation. So you're in Washington, D.C., you're talking about Congress, you're talking about creating some new laws to add this protection in. Is this something that you've had support from both Republicans and Democrats on?
So we've had support from Republicans and Democrats on the importance of bereavement and bereavement care.
Mm,
So last year, in fact, during the Trump administration, we advanced language in the U.S. budget process to
okay.
make bereavement care an important priority for some of our nation's leading health agencies, which it has never been before. We're working on a number of different initiatives that I won't get into at the moment that we do have bipartisan support for.
Hmm.
Honestly, when most people hear that you can be fired the next day after losing a spouse or a child or a sibling, most people are astonished
Yeah,
that there's no legal protections.
right.
And so we are working with folks across the aisle on the importance of paid bereavement leave, but more importantly, even bereavement care and the research that the nation needs to be doing in order to
Mm.
support families.
Gotcha. Okay. So you guys are working the Washington, D.C. angle and working in the halls of Congress. Is there something that we can do if we're concerned, if we're sitting out here, we're listening, we are widowed, we're thinking of other people? Of course, we've got a pandemic. There are more people dying than
Yes.
usual, but on top of, this is always a problem. If we want to help, is there something we can do, or do we just need to sit and wait?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. We need your help now. So I'll tell you, earlier this year, we led a coalition of more than 100 organizations from across the country, and President Biden included paid bereavement leave as part of his American Families Plan. And
Mm,
so right now, Congress is looking at the components of the American Families Plan and other initiatives and priorities, and beginning to write legislation around that. So there are a handful of senators who've been tasked with specifically writing legislation right now around whether or not bereavement and other issues related to the Family Medical Leave Act should be included. And so the legislation is not written yet. And so I can't give you a bill number, for example, or give people something to read, but we are encouraging everyone we know to call 16 senators and tell them why paid bereavement leave matters to you.
16 senators. Okay. There are, of course, 100 senators. So why 16? Why those 16? And where do we find out which ones we should be calling?
Yeah, so those 16 are actually working on the legislation right now and are going to be
Uh,
vital as to whether or not it actually moves forward. And so
gotcha.
you can find more information on our website about this and about who to call, along with phone numbers for all of those members. Our website is www.live-evermore, EVERMORE.org. And we need every voice. So often in Washington, for every one phone call that is placed to these offices, it usually represents at least 10 voters. And so, as you can imagine, when you get to scale, whether it's 10 or 20 people who begin to call, then we start getting into this. You're representing thousands of people and thousands of
Yeah.
members.
So, okay. So 16. If I have time, it sounds like I should call all 16. That would be
That would be
potentially helpful.
ideal. But if you don't have the time, the first one to call would be Ron Wyden, who has a particular authority over this piece of writing this piece of legislation, and he is a senator from Oregon. Alternatively, if you live in one of the states of these 16 senators, you should also call them. But that shouldn't preclude anyone from calling all 16 as to whether or not you live in their geographic boundaries. By default, right now, they're writing legislation that represents all of America. And
Mm,
so we wouldn't typically tell people to call all 16. But since they are writing something that's so powerful and so significant to so many families, it's important for these offices to hear why paid bereavement leave is important to America.
gotcha. Okay. So just to recap on that, I don't live in Oregon, but I should call Ron Wyden anyway, because he's so pivotal to this process and how it's going to come out. And then I did take a peek at the list. It looks like one of my senators, Maria Cantwell, is on the list. So I should call her as well. And then if I have time, pick a few more.
That's right.
And if I have lots of time, call them all. Are you wanting calls like, today, this week, this month? Like what's the timeline here?
Great question. In the next 2 weeks, it is
Gotcha.
likely, of course, here in Washington, there's a lot going on. There's Afghanistan, there is hurricane and, other issues that Congress is considering right now. It looks like this legislation is going to be written and done, maybe not necessarily publicly available by September 15th.
Wow.
I had some indication this morning that indeed this piece of legislation may be done by September 9th. And so we are talking about in the next 2 weeks that if paid bereavement leave is going to become a federal law and that people will not lose their jobs or their wages as a result, literally the next 10 to 14 days will be pivotal.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to carve out some time on my calendar to call. What should we say when we call? Like, how do we do this? If you've never called your senator before, like, how does it work?
So it's actually pretty easy, although it can seem a little daunting. One of the things that we always say to people to start is to be respectful above all else. But when you call these offices, they work for the people. And so the first thing we'd like you to do is tell them your story. Why is this important to you? Did you have a caring employer or not? And then tell them that now is the time. If we don't get paid bereavement leave in the next couple of weeks, it will likely be, not to be dramatic, at least a decade, if not much longer before. This is not something that's going to move very easily again at all.
You've got a little window right now of a chance to get it in.
That's correct. And so we're also asking people to tell them that they should receive 5 days of paid leave effective immediately. And that means essentially for most people, you'll get about a week away from the job, which still isn't necessarily enough time, but it is a great start in compared to what we currently have. And then we say effective immediately, because sometimes when legislation is written, they'll say effective in 3 years, effective in 5 years.
Yeah.
So we really want people to have 5 days of paid leave effective immediately. And those are the most important points. Some of the offices will be picking up the phone, but many of them will have voicemail. And it's important just to leave a voicemail. Every voicemail and every call is logged. And so they do reviews often daily on who's calling on what issues. So even when it feels like your voice isn't being heard, it indeed is.
Gotcha. Okay. And they really do want to hear from us, regular voters in the country, wherever we are, on our opinions on this issue.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, even while doing this work, I've been in so many different offices and people have told me, like, you're the real deal. Like, you're not a slick Washington lobbyist who has millions of dollars or dozens of clients. You are here really representing the people. And we often bring people with us to those meetings who share their stories and tell them why that this issue is so important. And so we matter in, I think, a special way into many of these offices. And so our voices are not the typical voices that they hear from, but they are some of the most important.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, remind us one more time, where can we find the list of people to call? And do you also have a way for us to stay in the loop on this and other issues that you guys are working on here?
Absolutely. The best thing to do is to visit our website at www.live-evermore.org. There you can sign up for our website. You can sign up to advocate. You can sign up to receive other sort of updates from the organization, events, and so forth. You will also find a web page as you sort of click through. It's pretty evident. It will take you to a landing page where you can find the senators. And there's a short script that we recommend, some high talking points that people can use along with the
Gotcha.
family members. Yeah,
Gotcha. And again, the key points were tell your story and advocate for 5 days effective immediately.
that's right.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Well, I'll put that, the link and some of those points down below here in the notes so that people can jump right to find your stuff. Hopefully make a couple of calls today, a couple more spread out this week, and see if we can get this moving here in the next 10 days, like you said, so we don't miss the chance for the next decade to do something meaningful here. Because
Right.
I do think it is so important and affects like almost everyone.
It does almost affect everyone. In fact, usually the way I talk to these offices is we have 4 concurrent national public health emergencies happening right now when it comes to death. And that is beyond COVID-19, homicide, suicide, and overdose. This issue impacts millions of Americans, and we really can do better.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll leave it on that. So Joyelle, thank you so much for speaking with us today. And I encourage everyone to go and call your senators and sign up to stay in the loop on what Joyelle and Evermore are doing. And again, great talking to you today. Thank you.
Great talking to you, Jenny. Thank you.